So Mary started her professional career researching and teaching chemistry, first at Oxford and later here at Cambridge University. Her career has subsequently spanned a range of advisory, business and public service positions, including chairing Cambridge University's Hospital NH Trust and currently the Science Museum Group. In her talk, she will share how her scientific background has influenced what she has brought to these and the value of women in science more generally. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for your kind words of introduction, John. I must say it's nice to see a room full of audience, unlike an event I spoke at some time ago, which was very poorly attended. So I said to the organizer, this is disappointing turnout. Did you tell them I was coming? Oh, no, she said, but it must have leaked out. I've been asked to say something about my career and to reflect on the value of a scientific background, or perhaps more generally STEM, because of course you engineers put the E in STEM. So to begin at the beginning, I was born in the last year of the war, last full year of the war, the middle of 3 children, lived in Epsom. I remember rationing cod liver oil and malt, rosehip syrup. My father was a chartered accountant who believed in women's lib. My mother was, as they generally were in those days, a housewife and mother. John said he always wanted to be an engineer, and I think I always wanted to be a scientist. I conducted my first scientific experiment, so my father used to tell me, at the age of about 10, when I tied an earthworm into a knot to see if it would untie itself, which not. It's a very good job I wasn't a trained scientist at the time. I would have taken 100 earthworms and tied them all into knots to make the result statistically significant. My little primary school didn't teach science, but it had a wonderful room. It was an attic in an old country house called the Discovery Room, where they had an absolute pickle of bits of scientific engineering and natural history kit and animals. There was an axolotl. There was a gold leaf electroscope with rabbit fur and an ebony rod you could rub and then show the static from the divergence of the gold leaves. But the thing that really fascinated me was a huge glistening yellow crystal, which turned out to be sulfur. And as soon as I got to my secondary school and discovered that chemistry was the subject that told you about sulfur, not to mention the other 100 odd elements in the periodic table, that was for me. Just to pause for a minute and say how lucky I was as a woman to have been born in the 20th century when the struggle for the higher education of women had been won, essentially. Not all girls of my age or even your age, and some of you are young, are so fortunate if you think about the opposition to girls' education in some parts of the world. And indeed, for many centuries, the education of English girls didn't go beyond reading and learning to write their names. Queen Elizabeth I was an exception, a brilliant and highly educated woman, but her successor, James I of England, James VI of Scotland, refused to allow his daughter a classical education, declaring, "To make women learned and foxes tame has the same effect, to make them more cunning." And women's education was to remain severely restricted throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. Not until the 19th century did things finally start to change, but not without a fight. And the history of the struggle of women to gain access to higher education and then equality of opportunity within the academic bastions they gradually and successively created or stormed, is a heroic one. From the pioneering founders of the great 19th century girls' schools, through the long march towards the conferment of university degrees on women. In 1878, London, University College London, became the first in the UK to admit women to its degrees. This was achieved by Oxford in 1920, but Cambridge is very conservative in some ways, and they waited until 1948 to grant women their degrees. Before then, they had a bit of paper saying they had the title of their degrees, whatever that was meant to mean. But by the mid-20th century, women were going into science in some numbers. And as I said, that's what I always wanted to do. So I graduated in chemistry from Oxford in 1966. And the very first thing I did thereafter, rather unfashionable and non-PC, you might say, was to get married, which I thought very grown up at the time. My husband became a member of the Greater London Council, now defunct, and I did my PhD at Imperial College with studies of heterogeneous catalysis using rotating disc electrode equipment, quite actually light engineering involved in keeping that whole contraption moving. I acquired all the right initials after my name, although my pride in these was somewhat abated shortly after I'd acquired my PhD, and I went to work one long vac at Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island, on the synchrotron, which was then nicknamed Isabel. When she was decommissioned, she got a new nickname, Wasabel. The porter who took my suitcase up to the girls' dorm, National Laboratories had girls' and boys' dorms in those days, looked at my luggage label and grunted. He said, Dr. Mary Archer, huh? You a real doctor, or you kind of doctor never did no good to nobody? So I had to say I was the latter kind of doctor. So I did a first postdoc back at Oxford and then a second at the Royal Institution in London, then directed by the late, great George Porter, who'd won a Nobel Prize for the development of a technique called flash photolysis, which interrogates what happens in chemical systems soon after irradiation with light, very soon after. You can now get down to an time interval of a femtosecond, which is very short. It was at the Royal Institution that I became interested in public engagement in science, because the Royal Institution has that great amphitheatre from which the children's lectures come still at Christmas. It had the very famous director, Dr. Michael Faraday, and before him, Humphrey Davy. So it was at the Royal Institution. Along the way, I had two sons. Career breaks weren't well organized in those days, but I was lucky to find a great nanny and soldiered on. Then in 1975, a family financial crisis meant that we needed to find a cheaper place to live than London. In those days, I think Cambridge must have been cheaper, because it certainly isn't now. But anyway, I got a job to teach chemistry at Newnham and Trinity colleges, and my family and I moved to Cambridge and have been here very happily ever since. The reason I got a job both at Trinity and Newnham was it was just the time when the old single-sex colleges were going mixed. King's College here was the first to go mixed to admit women, and Girton, the first women's college to admit men. That came a bit later, I think. And Trinity, being rather grand and staid, couldn't quite bring itself to admit women undergraduates, but they went round to the women's colleges and said, we need teaching in subjects A, B, C, D, and chemistry, and we'll pay 3/4 of a woman's stipend. If you can find a woman, make her a fellow, and we'll make her a lector. And that's how I came to Trinity. It all seems a very long time ago now when I look at the co-education that is the norm now throughout all universities. So I taught and researched chemistry for 10 years. But the funny thing is, universities hire you as a scholar, but it's very hard, unless you demonstrate complete incompetence at it, not to do a bit of management. You get put on audit committees and the like. And most academics run screaming from these experiences, but I discovered I rather enjoyed them. And that was what prompted me to undertake the single most risky thing I've ever done in my life, I suppose, and leave academia and try my luck in the real world. Of course, you soon discover there is no such thing as the real world. There are lots of other worlds. There's a world of engineers, there's a world of professional societies, there's a world of Cambridge community. But anyway, I took up a portfolio career. I went on the Council of Lloyds of London, went on the board of Anglia Television, one of the ITV regional companies, and I did quite a lot of energy advisory work for government arising out of my research. I sat on the government's first renewable energy advisory group. And I remember there was so little to see in this country, we all had to go off to Denmark to have a look at a wind farm. So things have moved on very positively there, and not a moment too soon. Among the things I did was to join the board of Addenbrooke's Hospital here in Cambridge. And I sort of sat around on that until they made me vice chair and then chair. So Cambridge University Hospitals was a new world for me. And after teaching for so long, it was fun to learn again. And that's one of the things I have learned from the 2 or 3 career breaks I've undertaken in my life so far, that although the first 6 months can be pretty uncomfortable, it is enormously rejuvenating. And one of the things, for those of you particularly who are starting out on a professional career, I would say is you'll be doing things, there will be turns of events that will surprise you and maybe disconcert you, but they're likely to be very invigorating and rejuvenating. So I'm still associated with Cambridge. I left chairing it in 2012, but I'm still associated with Cambridge University Hospitals. One of the things I'm most proud of that I did while I was there was create a charity that was then called, a little bit jokingly, Addenbrooke's Abroad, but now has a much more grown-up title, Cambridge Global Health Partnerships. And this takes healthcare professionals, and they could be estates people, they could be HR people, they could be doctors, they could be nurses, they could be physios, and pairs them with, as it were, like teams in other parts of the world, which are less well-resourced for mutual learning. So there are partnerships now with Botswana, El Salvador, Myanmar, Uganda, and the Philippines. And that's been tremendous to see. And then in 2015, I was very lucky to be appointed to chair the Science Museum Group. That's to say, the group of 5 museums, of which the flagship is the Science Museum in London. But we also own and operate the National Railway Museum in York, the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, the Science and Media Museum in Bradford, that's film, photography and television, and another train museum called Locomotion in Shildon in County Durham, which is essentially the world's first railway town. It was out of Shildon on the 26th of September, 1825, that a locomotive called Locomotion Number 1 hauled a wagon load of passengers who paid for their tickets from Stockton to Darlington, thus opening, if you like, the Stockton-Darlington Railway. So its bicentenary comes up in just a few years, in 2025. One of the alarming things about becoming associated with the Science Museum is that although you are reasonably well trained in your own scientific discipline, people blithely assume you'll know about all the other sciences too. And I do recall when I was appointed, my elder son said, Mum, he said, I know you know a few things about chemistry, but what do you know about railways? So I had to say, well, not a lot, but I have learnt a lot since. And my admiration for the engineering feats of the early locomotive designers and engineers has given me a much better appreciation of one part of the discipline of engineering, but it is, of course, so very variegated. At the Science Museum, we have a gallery called Engineer Your Future, which is aimed at teenage girls. It doesn't say that on the door, but we always know which audiences we're going for. And it shows what you'll know about engineering, that it requires teamwork, that it's creative, and that is aimed at solving problems that matter to people. So, for example, there's a wonderful prosthetic hand that does its thing, electronically controlled, and then a spiel about how it works and who built it. And there are 5 or 6 different exhibits like that, some of which require teamwork to operate them. And next year, we'll open a gallery called Technicians Make It Happen. And it is exactly about that, the often undersung role of technicians. Chemists like me could never really get off the ground if there wasn't a technician who could run the NMR machine or the mass spectroscope or whatever it might be. This gallery will show the range of roles open to technicians, from servicing wind turbines to assaying blood in health laboratories. So the Science Museum's statutory role is to look after, explain, and exhibit the national collections in STEM subjects, and also medicine and mathematics. But our mission is to inspire futures. And in a normal year, and let's hope we get back to one of those sometime soon, through the doors of our 5 museums with their teachers in booked school groups, ready to have a learning experience, we have over 600,000 school children come every year. So we have an enormous opportunity, and I would say duty and responsibility, to ignite the curiosity and the wonder of young people in the great things that STEM subjects have created for us. And heaven knows there are plenty of challenges for science today. Transitioning to a net zero future, providing food and clean water for a world population that's increasing at a rate of 9,000 people per hour. Curing disease, developing vaccines to pit against viruses that get ever clever, and new antibiotics to pit against ever-evolving bacteria. How to care for an aging population. The great triumph of public health following the creation of the NHS in 1948 has been increased life expectancy, and that's now turned into one of the NHS's greatest challenges, in that the increasing number of frail elderly people and the relatively small working population to support them are getting out of whack. So that's a kind of canter through my life so far. Reflecting on it, as I indicated earlier, life is often surprising. I guess I thought when I got my fellowship at Cambridge, that was it. until I reached retirement age, but it wasn't. And I couldn't have guessed the turns my career has taken. I certainly surprised myself by deciding to leave full-time chemistry teaching to move into a broader range of roles. And then I surprised myself again when I became involved with the NHS and chaired Cambridge University Hospitals. And then I was both surprised and delighted and very lucky to be appointed as chair of the Science Museum Group. So looking back on all of that, one thing I'd say is that whatever your background and experience is, I think you find opportunities to recycle it usefully into the life you lead now. I would also say that academic success, which is so important at school and university, becomes almost irrelevant in the long run as compared with good judgment. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that outstanding academic ability may in fact narrow people's options as much as it broadens them, because it blinkers them to non-academic opportunities. But perhaps what distinguishes those who will have happy and fulfilled lives from those who will not is not innate ability, but energy, enthusiasm, and persistence through good times and bad. To take an example, one would not go into farming because one thinks the next summer will be a good one, but rather because one believes in the long-term importance and satisfaction of agriculture. Similarly, one shouldn't go into a job because it offers a quick return, but one should select one's first career and undergo the training required for it, because that builds a solid base on which to build a lifelong career or careers. So we talk about putting our backs into it, pulling our fingers out, sticking our necks out, putting our best feet forward, rolling up our shirt sleeves, jumping in at the deep end, girding our loins, and reaching for the sky. It would be quite an anatomical feat to do all those things simultaneously. But what I am trying to say, and I know I'm preaching to the converted because engineering is a tough discipline and a great one, is that you have to go for it. And I think that's what I've learned. Most things that are worth doing take time and effort. And I would also say from my own experience that a grounding in science or a science subject gives everyone, especially girls actually, a great start in life. It teaches one accuracy, precision, and numeracy, all valuable life skills. It teaches one respect for evidence rather than opinion, and for reasoned argument rather than overheated polemics. So many congratulations to all you who are about to receive your awards from my colleague Alice. And I'll leave you with the memory of my very favorite New Yorker cartoon. There's a lot of good cartoons in the New Yorker, but this one has two beavers standing at the bottom of a dam, clearly with a hydroelectric power station at the base. And one beaver is saying to the other, "I didn't actually build it, but it's based on my design ideas." So many congratulations and very good luck in the next stage of your careers. Thank you.